Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our qualification management in the real world supplier qualification, quality management, I say qualification, sorry about that, quality management in the real world supplier qualification. Today, we're going to be talking with Nick Metrakos, a solution consultant with ETQ and an accomplished auditor. My name is David Isaacson. I'm the Senior Director of Product Marketing here at ETQ. Nick will give us a quick overview of the topic today, and then we'll have a couple of questions and a little discussion. And we'll also take questions from everybody on the line today. We welcome everybody, and the number of people joining is really growing right now. So just before we get started, a couple of housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded, and you will be able to get a copy of that. All registrants will get a copy of the recording. In GoToWebinar, which is the tool we're using today for this event, you can ask questions through the question box in the GoToWebinar tool. And we show a picture of that on this slide so you know where to go ahead and enter your questions. And then at the end of the webinar, we will be asking you to take a short survey. So before we get to Nick, I just want to spend 2 minutes introducing ETQ, today's sponsor. We are a company that provides quality management solutions. We've been in this business for over 25 years and have deep experience in understanding and solving our customers' quality management needs. We have 300 employees that are strictly focused on quality management, and we serve a broad number of different industries with our solutions. ETQ believes that what we do helps drive companies' growth through differentiated and agile approaches to quality management. It really is about quality makes a difference in an organization in terms of being successful. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nick and let him take us through the next section of the presentation.
Hello and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to speak with you all. I'm excited to talk to you a little bit about supplier qualification audits and some ways that we can help smooth out the corrective action closure. Just a little bit of background. As David mentioned, I work for ETQ now, but prior to that, I was a quality manager at some biotech startups out in the Bay Area and was a customer of ETQ's Reliance product and used that to build my quality management system. I'm an experienced supplier auditor, both having worked in quality, but then also as a contract auditor, and am a certified lead auditor to both the 1345 and 9001 standards. And I've worked across various industries, auditing medical device manufacturers, pharma companies, manufacturers, and food and beverage people. Okay, so at the end of this webinar, we hope you're going to come away with 3 things. The first is that we hope that you're going to feel better about identifying the challenges that arise when you're managing your supplier audit corrective action plans. So we're going to talk about what those challenges are, and I hope that after this, you're going to come away with having those a little bit more front of mind. Secondly, we hope you're going to feel more capable when you close supplier audits, and you're going to minimize any friction that could occur between you and your supplier. It's one thing I always like to remind people of is that a supplier audit is important to maintaining quality and to reducing the risk in your supply chain, but it's also a way to engender trust and to build a stronger business relationship with your vendors. And finally, we want to share some ways that you could help to reduce the time it takes for supplier audit closure by looking at how those challenges could be mitigated through automated solutions. So let's talk about why supplier audits occur, because we know that there's lots of different reasons why we could be on-site auditing a supplier. The first one, and the most obvious that people might think of, is you need to actually go out and qualify the supplier because you're starting your business relationship with them. Maybe your supplier quality management procedure specifies you need to audit on site your most critical suppliers. And so you're going to need to go before you actually start using them in production and conduct an audit and make sure that their facilities and their quality standards are up to your snuff. You could also be doing as part of your ongoing management of existing suppliers. So I'm sure many of you on the line have procedures that specify you need to go do recurring audits on some frequency for your most critical suppliers. And so this could be another reason why you're going out in the field to talk to them. Thirdly, you could be doing it because the supplier has notified you of a major change to some product or service that you use, or it could be as part of launching a new product or service from that supplier that you're going to take advantage of. And so in this case, you might be going on site with a subject matter expert from your company to evaluate some of the technical things that have occurred as a result of this change. And finally, it could be in response to some quality event or nonconformance that's been identified. I find these tend to be a little bit less frequent, but maybe it's because I'm very optimistic. But of course, you could always be going on site because you've had some major issue from the supplier. You've escalated them to the point where you need to really engage, go on site, and figure out what's going wrong. Regardless of the reason why you're doing these supplier audits, so I just want to emphasize that the objective of all of these types of supplier audits is to reduce the risk in your supply chain. It's really easy to get very invested in one audit and focus on one supplier, but always keep in mind that big picture, that 1,000-foot, 10,000-foot view, that you're doing this audit to reduce risk to the supply chain and to help reduce risk to the business that you're offering your customers. And the reason why I emphasize that is sometimes in the quality world, we do have a sense to kind of get really focused on our one little area and we lose that connection to the overall business. And so this is an important thing to keep in mind, especially if you're having trouble maybe getting funding to actually go out and do supplier audits, or you're getting a lot of friction within your company because they think you're spending too much time on the road doing audits. This is just a good way to keep it connected to the rest of the business, that you're doing these audits to reduce risk to your supply chain and to help pass on something better to your own customers. I'm sure most of us know this, but I like to remind everyone that auditing is a lifecycle process. It's not a single point in time. And so I'm going to use the ISO standard for the guidelines for auditing management systems as a framework to talk about the steps in that lifecycle process and how it circles back on itself over time. So obviously the first step is to just initiate an audit, specify that you're going to be doing an audit for some reason, whether it's one of the reasons that we talked about on the previous slide or some other reason. You're going to prepare for that audit by collecting stakeholders within your company that know about your relationship with the supplier, reviewing data. If it's a new supplier that you don't have a relationship with, maybe you're going to be looking at documentation that they've sent you or researching online to see if anything comes from the news. You're actually going to go conduct that audit. In most cases, you're going to travel on site and do it. You might be doing it remotely using a webinar, using a web service. Or you might be doing it just reviewing paper documents, but I think in most cases you're going to be going on site, actually conducting that audit over a 1 to 2 to multiple day period. You're going to report out the results of that audit, things that you found that were not in conformance with the audit criteria that you were using to evaluate the auditee. That report will get sent out. The things that were found that were non-conforming or that require some sort of corrective action on the part of the supplier are going to be documented in the form of a corrective action plan that will be sent back to you as the auditor, as the company that's actually conducting the audit. You're going to review that to make sure that the plan that they've proposed is sufficient. And then you're going to be following up with them to make sure that they're closing out the corrective action plan and everything that they said they were going to do, they're going to be doing on time, and that you're ready to conduct your next audit. And so that's how it connects back to this first initial kind of prepare phase, because you're going to be going through, and the next time you prepare for an audit of that supplier, you'll be looking at everything that happened during the follow-up of the previous audit. I want to talk now about these last 3 little blocks: the reporting, the completion, and the follow-up, because when you're doing an internal audit, it's really easy to report out something within your organization, follow up on a corrective action plan, and make sure that it gets closed on time because you're part of the same group. You might even be sitting in the same office or in the same building. This gets a little bit trickier though when you're dealing with someone outside of your organization like a supplier. And so I want to talk about the challenges that arise specifically in these supplier audits and kind of raise some of the most common challenges so we can all have them front of mind. So the first challenge is just agreeing on the right corrective action. Sometimes you go on site to do an audit and you find that there's a non-conforming part of their quality system or a process that they have, and you give that finding to the auditee, and they come back to the corrective action that just doesn't seem sufficient or doesn't seem to really address what you were hoping they would address. And so this can sometimes be a little bit of a back and forth with the auditee to make sure that the corrective action that they're proposing is actually going to be addressing what you observed throughout the audit. The second challenge, which is really kind of the biggest, most pervasive challenge, is that there's going to be a set of competing interests and priorities. So if you're conducting a supplier audit and your supplier has hosted 30 other audits before you this year, they have their own internal audits, and they've got a quality team of 3 people, they're going to be juggling a lot of things. And unless you represent a large part of their business or you're a really strategic partner of theirs, you might find yourself coming up against the challenge of just making yourself relevant to them, because you might get put on a long queue and you might not be able to actually see the corrective actions that you would like closed in the time that you need. So this is something that's really important to remember and to be aware of. Connected with this is, due to these competing interests and priorities, you might find yourself continuously nudging the supplier for updates on closing out those corrective actions. So, a lot of times if you're issuing paper reports through a PDF, you're getting a response back, you're having this whole dialogue over email back and forth, and they might agree to one timeline, but you're going to need to continue to check in with them and say, how are things going? Do things seem on track? Do you think you're going to close this corrective action when you think you will, et cetera, et cetera. You'll also see that there could be changes to the timeline for the corrective action plan that they've proposed at the supplier site. And again, this is just due to those competing interests and priorities. So they might have said that they would get something done by Q2 of this year, but when you follow up with them, 30 days before the end of the quarter, they tell you they actually haven't done anything, and it's not going to happen until Q3 or Q4. And that's something that can be frustrating and certainly be a challenge. And so it's something you have to be aware of. The reason why I mention all these challenges is that it's important that you're able to provide objective evidence to your own auditors that your process is in control, right? Because when we talk about conducting supplier audits, closing out corrective actions, and making sure that you have control over your own supply chain, that's something that an auditor is going to come look at when they come to audit you. And if you are facing any of these challenges, it could be challenging for you to provide objective evidence that you have your process in control, because you might have a procedure that doesn't have the flexibility built in, let's say, for example, for changes to timeline at the supplier site. But maybe this is something you want to consider, maybe increasing the tolerance there so that you can flex when these challenges almost inevitably arise with the supplier. And finally, I want to touch just a little bit on how an automated solution could address some of the challenges we talked about before, because a lot of the challenges are inevitable because of the relationship between a supplier and a customer, but they can be mitigated through using a piece of software that automates a lot of those steps. So first of all, if you're using an automated solution, you can do audit checklists electronically and generate those reports automatically, so that when you have a finding associated with a particular piece of the audit, you could assign that corrective action directly to the supplier in the live software, have them respond and provide a corrective action, and you can be drafting a response live by collaborating through the live software. So this kind of takes out that back and forth step of sharing Word documents or PDF documents back and forth over email, because you can be dealing with a specific line item in a checklist, right after you close out the audit and you send that corrective action on to that person. Secondly, and kind of connected, if you're using a piece of software and you give your supplier access to that software in a restricted way, or if you have an integration with one of your key suppliers' other systems, this is going to allow for more direct collaboration, both within the context of an audit, but also within the context of any nonconformances that become scars when incoming material is found to be nonconforming. So that's another thing that will kind of save you cycles on constant email back and forth. And one of the things I didn't put on the slide, but is important to remember, that in our increasingly global economy, we could be working with suppliers in drastically different time zones. And when you're living in this world of email cycles, sometimes your two time zones only overlap for like a couple-hour window during the day, and that's the only time you're going to be seeing email traffic back and forth. Thirdly, instead of having to nudge suppliers to say, hey, when are you going to get this corrective action plan? And how are things going? It's due on this date, and having this dialogue over email. With an automated solution, you can set due dates and have automatic escalation emails be generated when those due dates are approaching. And when they are missed, you can have additional escalation emails sent to constantly be pinging that assigned user or that assigned party to make sure that they're following through. And that's going to save you the time and headache of going through a spreadsheet and trying to find everyone that has a corrective action coming due and reaching out to them manually. And finally, obviously, when you're storing all this great data in an automated software solution, you can graph that data, chart that data, use that to share with other parties within your company, use it when you're doing your supplier evaluations or scorecards. And with more predictive and advanced analytics, you can even do things like track how long it takes you to close out supplier audits and start to build control charts around that and say, okay, it looks like our average time to close a supplier audit is this, plus or minus these upper and lower confidence levels. And our goal or quality objective for this year is to reduce it by X number of days. So you can do things a little bit more sophisticated and nuanced with your quality system beyond just, digging through thousands of lines of a spreadsheet trying to follow up with people over email. So that's just some of the ways that an automated solution can help with the challenges we talked about before. With that being said, I think David and I are going to have a little conversation now. We've got some great questions coming in over the chat that we're going to take a look at, and then I think David has some other things that we want to chat about.
Sure. So thank you, Nick. I know that what you're seeing here, folks, on the phone is the first of a series of short form webinars that we're going to do. It'll be 30 minutes. We're not going to take a lot of time out of your day, but we want to make sure that you're getting some interesting information regarding different topics. This topic, as you've heard Nick talk about, is supply chain audits, and I'll mention the other topics we'll be doing in a few minutes. But Nick, this is interesting, and you've obviously done a lot of audits over time, and both been audited and done audits. Can you give us an example or a story of a significant or surprising finding you've come across during a supply chain audit? So what get people thinking about what they might run into.
Yeah, I mean, I think two kind of funny extreme stories come to mind. One is I was hired to do a contract audit of a manufacturer, and when I spoke with the auditee in advance, they stated, we don't really have a quality system. We just have some procedures that we follow, but we're not ISO or anything like that. And so I said, okay, well, when I show up on site, I'm just going to audit you against whatever procedures you have, I guess, because that's the only audit criteria that are really relevant, and there's nothing in the quality agreement between the supplier and the customer. So when I went on site, I was surprised when actually the owner of the company presented me with a quality manual that said, referenced ISO 9001:2015 and talked about all these great procedures they have, yada, yada, yada. And I said, wow, this is great. You said you don't conform to any ISO standards. I wouldn't expect you to have this full quality manual that, conforms to 9001 and has all these procedures referenced. This is great. So I start reading through it and I say, hey, you've got this change management procedure referenced. Could I take a look at it? And he goes, none of these actually exist. And I said, what? He's like, yeah, I just had some engineer that was really into this stuff, and I had him write up this quality manual, and I thought I would show it to you. And I was like, whoa.
That's pretty impressive, huh?
It's much better to just say that you have nothing and show only what is actually in practice than it is to make up a whole fake quality system that doesn't exist. So I think that's probably the funniest one. I think a surprising one on a more serious note is that I was auditing someone that had an ISO 1345:2016 certification, and those of you on the line that are in the 1345 world know that in the 2016 standard, there's this note that's added that says any software you're using for quality management has to be validated. And the site that I was auditing had just gone through their 1345 surveillance audit. And when I was talking to them, I asked to see the validation package around the software they were using for their quality management system, and they said, oh, it's not validated. We're not going to do that. It's too much work. And I was like, wow, that's surprising. It's interesting to see sometimes how these sometimes you have these bodies come in, conduct these audits, issue ISO certs, and there's some pretty glaring misses. So that's why I share that story, just to remind you that if you're doing supplier audits of suppliers or vendors on your ASL that have these ISO certs, don't take anything for granted, and always go back to that original standard they claim to conform to, and look for gaps, because they're definitely there.
And a follow-up question to what you just talked about: did they turn around and validate the QMS?
No, they said it was too much work. They weren't going to do it.
Okay.
So, I don't know. It'll happen. Maybe they'll get a different auditor next time from whoever gave them their cert, and they'll ask about it, and then they'll be forced to do it. But it was definitely interesting.
Yeah. Thank you, Richard, for that question. Here's a question. I don't know if you'll be able to answer this, but it's about the FDA in regard to how important is it for the FDA to ensure that the SQ process is followed properly in med device industries? Has the FDA seen some issues here?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really hot topic.
Okay.
I mean, that's one of the reasons why, David, when we were talking about webinar topics, I thought this would be really, really relevant, is because we just live in a very outsourced world, and some of these products, especially in med device, can have very complicated supply chains, hundreds of suppliers, maybe with a BOM that's like hundreds or thousands of parts, depending on the complexity of the device. So it's definitely something that they care about. Not in med device, but in pharma, I know that the FDA issues a lot of 483s related to issues with supplier quality agreements, and making sure that those are enforced.
Okay. And here's a great question from Steve. He asks, what frequency would you recommend for conducting these evaluations?
This is going to be an annoying quality answer, but I would say it all depends on what you've got in your risk management procedure at your company. I talked to a lot of people, and I've worked with some people in the past that they write these procedures saying they're going to do frequent on-site audits of their suppliers, and the way that they've binned their critical or highest risk suppliers is very large, and so they end up with, I don't know, 50 to 60 critical suppliers they're trying to audit, and they might not be a major Fortune 500 company with the resources to put into keeping up with those audits, and then they have the FDA come on site and say, hey, you said you're going to be auditing these people, you haven't done an audit in 7 years, and then you're kind of caught up against the wall because you said you were going to do something, but you can't actually afford to do it. So one of the techniques I always recommend is go back to your quality risk management tools and really think more intentionally about how you're assigning risk to suppliers and how that connects to the types of evaluations that you're doing.
Okay. And as you think about now doing these audits, how do you put together a supply audit team? Well, who should be on that? Who's best to do these audits?
I think you have to go back to the reason why you're doing the audit. If it's just an initial qualification, you might get away with just having someone from your quality team do the audit. I always recommend looking at someone's industry background and making sure that their industry experience aligns with whatever the auditee's space is. If you're doing something as a result of a change or of a new product offering, or you have an established relationship with that supplier, it's nice to find subject matter experts from your company that know how to participate in audits, that are willing to go with you, because it's a good way to dig a little bit more into the technical areas that the quality auditor might not have comfort with. And again, just going back to this idea of like a business relationship, it's also great for that SME to be on site and see where this critical product or service that they're using is being realized. And that shows investment too for the supplier side to say that, hey, this company is sending us 2 people to audit. Yes, it's going to maybe be a bit grueling or annoying, but this shows that this relationship is important between the 2 businesses.
Okay. And Kara asks a question or a comment here. For critical suppliers, typically for reevaluation for an approved supplier, thoughts of doing a remote desktop audit instead of on-site. If they're a critical supplier we've had no quality issues with in the last 2 to 3 years. What do you think of that approach?
I think it's definitely possible. This is just my personal taste. Huge asterisk disclaimer. This is not a standard or regulation or ETQ's official opinion. This is just my opinion. I think any longer than 2 years for critical supplier is too long to not be on site. You'd be surprised the things that they don't tell you, like, oh, we opened up a new facility and that's where we're actually manufacturing your product. And you think like, hey, we asked if there were any major changes, or this quality agreement you said you would notify us of changes, but you didn't tell us. And it's easy for those things to slip through the cracks. So I would say, maybe max 3 years, but I think annually you should be, for your highest risk, your most critical suppliers, I think annually you should be sending them a questionnaire to see if anything has changed. That's just my opinion.
Okay.
And with the caveat, I tend to be more conservative than others.
All right. And Brian has a question. Can you talk about the benefits or downsides of having a risk-based audit program versus a scheduled audit program?
The benefit of having a risk-based audit program is that you are able to be a little bit more efficient, because you can be evaluating the risk of particular situations and then respond to those. I think the trick there for risk versus scheduled is just making sure the way you are evaluating risk on an ongoing basis is is a good method, and you can explain and support that method when you're being audited. Because a lot of people do wave their hands and say, we're using risk management. Look, we've got green, red, yellow, and we're putting people in these categories, and it looks nice, but making sure that you're really able to explain the rationale behind how you've classified people into different categories is very important.
Okay. And then, so we're talking about suppliers and supply chain quality and audits. What preparations do you expect from a supplier before they get audited? What do you give instructions out ahead of time and warn them that you're coming and this is what you want?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, I think most auditors, right, are going to be sending an agenda out to the auditee to make sure that they're generally prepared. I mean, this is in the case of like a scheduled audit with a supplier. It's not a, you know, not something due to a quality event. So I always send that agenda out, and I would expect that once that agenda has been received, that the auditee is going to find the appropriate personnel to speak to particular issues. Going to expect that, you know, they're going to have an opening presentation that's going to give a background of the company, and they're going to touch on some of the areas that I've highlighted in the agenda. Internally, that they've confirmed with all the attendees that they need that they're actually available to participate in the audit. We're not trying to track someone down last minute. Any objective evidence that needs to be reviewed. If they've got a, you know, a paper-based system, making sure all of their records are in order and it's easy to find things so we don't waste time. I think finally, on a lighter note, if it's a full day audit, making sure that lunch is planned. I've done audits in the past where they've just said, okay, you've got an hour for lunch. I'm like, we're in the middle of a field. I don't know where you want me to go. So they're like, so those are some of the things I expect in preparation. I think they're all pretty standard, nothing shocking.
All right, what about any tactics regarding surprise audits? Your own opinion on that? Daniela would like to know, by the way.
That's a great question, Daniela. You know, for a surprise audit, you've got to make sure that, one, it's really warranted, and two, that the relationship between you and the supplier can tolerate that sort of event. If it's an established relationship or you represent a huge part of their business, then absolutely doing a surprise audit should be fine. If you're not a huge chunk of their revenue and you haven't been working with them for very long, doing a surprise audit can maybe set the wrong tone and make it difficult for you to move forward with that supplier. So that's my opinion.
Okay. And then should all suppliers have a quality agreement in place?
Not necessarily. I mean, in procedures that I've developed or in systems that I've worked in, that's generally, you know, a quality agreements for your highest risk suppliers, ones that are providing either critical raw material or direct product contact or sterilization services or things like this. But again, I go back to that risk management framework and just say the highest risk, highest criticality suppliers, the ones where you're gonna have a quality agreement in place. People that are lower risk, you're not gonna have one in place, which is not to say that you can't have one in place. It just makes it harder for you to enforce that quality agreement across more of your supply chain.
Okay. I think we've pretty much gotten to the end of the questions. Let me just make a couple other comments here. First of all, thank you everybody for joining us today. One of the several questions did come up specific to ETQ's QMS product Reliance. We will, in a future webinar, go into more detail about Reliance. And several of you said, can we see the product, or does it, you know, how does this work and things like that. We definitely want to get to that. That was not planned as part of this particular webinar, but we definitely want to get into that. And Nick will show some more details of the product in one of the future webinars. We also are planning some other webinars around maintaining supplier records, approving materials and suppliers. As I said, the intention is for these to be brief 30-minute webinars that give you some very specific and targeted nuggets of information. If you are a current ETQ customer and you are available or coming to Miami next week for our customer conference, there will be more discussion about supplier quality there. Nick, I don't know if you're going to be down there next week or you're going to be traveling elsewhere.
I will be here. We will be with a newborn. So we will.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's going to be a lot of fun.
All right, but there will be other people down in Miami who will be able to talk to quality for anybody who is there. And if you're an ETQ customer and have not yet registered, I would recommend you do that as quick as possible. And with that, I'm going to say thank you to Nick. If you are going to be at the user conference, the agenda is on our website. You can check out when the different sessions are. And we thank everybody who joined us today, and we will talk to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.